The kitchen buzzed with the usual morning routine. The clinking of plates, the faint hum of the coffee machine, the sizzle of pancakes on the stove. Everything felt normal, almost too normal. Jeffrey sat at the head of the table, his eyes scanning the newspaper, but his mind was elsewhere. He flipped the page, pretending to be absorbed, but the silence between him, Claudia, and Layla felt heavy. He could hear the knife scraping against butter as Claudia prepared breakfast, but the usual warmth of her presence had turned cold. "Honey, are you going to the office today?" Claudia asked, not even glancing up as she flipped another pancake. Jeffrey lowered the newspaper slightly, watching her from the corner of his eye. She sounded casual, like nothing was wrong, but there was something missing from her voice. The way she used to speak to him, like they were partners, like she cared. Now it was like they were strangers living under the same roof. "Yeah, a few meetings. Should be back by 6, he replied, keeping his voice steady. She nodded, her back still turned to him. No follow-up. No good luck with your meetings, or have a nice day. Just silence. Jeffrey stared at her for a moment longer, taking in the slight tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided eye contact. Something was wrong. It had been wrong for months, but neither of them had the courage to address it. He sighed, lifting his coffee cup to his lips. It had gone cold. Across the table, their daughter Layla sat slumped over her phone, her thumbs tapping away at the screen with the kind of intensity she rarely gave anything else. She didn't look up once, not even when Claudia placed a plate of pancakes in front of her. "Layla, how's school going?" Jeffrey asked, hoping to break through the wall of indifference she had built around herself lately. "Fine," she muttered, her eyes still glued to the phone. "Fine, always fine." No elaboration, no effort to engage. He didn't even know what classes she was taking anymore, what friends she hung out with, if she had plans for college. All the little conversations they used to have had dried up, leaving him feeling like an outsider in his own home. Jeffrey took a deep breath and tried to suppress the frustration. This was his daughter, the little girl who used to run to him when he got home from work, who used to sit with him on the couch and laugh at old cartoons. Now, she barely looked at him. Anything except... Layla sighed heavily, as if the mere effort of replying was too much. No. His stomach tightened, but he didn't push further. What was the point? Every attempt at connection lately felt like banging his head against a wall. He glanced back at Claudia, who was cleaning up the stove, her back still turned to him. She had heard the conversation, or lack thereof, but she didn't say anything. She didn't step in to bridge the gap, to support him like she used to. It was like she didn't care. He wanted to say something to confront her, but the words stuck in his throat. What would he even say? He wasn't even sure what was wrong anymore. All he knew was that his family, the people he loved most, were slipping away from him, and he had no idea how to stop it. Claudia finally sat down at the table with her own plate, her eyes focused on her food. Jeffrey tried to make eye contact, hoping for a smile, a look, anything to reassure him that they were still connected in some small way. But she didn't look up. "Got any plans for today?" Jeffrey asked, his voice carefully casual. Claudia shrugged, slicing into her pancake. "Not really. Just some errands. Might visit Mom later." It was the same answer she gave most days. She used to share her plans with him, talk about what she wanted to do with the house, or ask him if he wanted to go out with her. Now, it felt like she had her own world, one he wasn't a part of. "You've been seeing Mom a lot lately," Jeffrey said, trying to sound conversational, but failing to mask the underlying tension. Claudia paused mid-bite, glancing at him for the first time. Her eyes were guarded, distant. "Yeah, she's been feeling a little down. You know how she is." Jeffrey nodded slowly, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right with him. She was lying. He could feel it. She had been visiting her mom, sure, but not as often as she claimed. There had been too many late nights, too many vague explanations. "Maybe we can have dinner tonight, just the two of us," he offered, hoping to reconnect with her, to find some way back to the intimacy they had lost. Claudia's expression barely shifted. Maybe, if I'm back in time. Maybe. If. Words that used to carry promises now felt like excuses. He looked down at his plate, his appetite gone. Across the table, Layla stood up, her phone still in hand. I'm going to Katie's after school. Won't be home for dinner, she said flatly, already walking away before either of them could respond. Jeffrey watched her go, the door to her room closing with a dull thud. He sat in silence, feeling the weight of the morning settle heavily on his shoulders. This was his life now, a wife who barely spoke to him, a daughter who treated him like a stranger. The love and warmth that had once filled their home had been replaced by cold indifference. He glanced at Claudia, who was scrolling through her own phone now, her breakfast untouched. He could feel the distance between them growing wider with every second that passed, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find a way to close it. For weeks now, he had felt this creeping sense of dread, like there was something happening just beneath the surface that he couldn't see. A secret, maybe, or a lie. Something that explained why everything had fallen apart so suddenly. But whenever he tried to confront it, it slipped through his fingers, leaving him frustrated and confused. The sound of Claudia's phone buzzing snapped him out of his thoughts. She glanced at the screen, her face unreadable, then stood up abruptly. I'm going to head out now. Lots to do today, she said, her voice tight. See you tonight. She was already grabbing her purse and heading for the door before Jeffrey could respond. He watched her leave, the door closing behind her with a soft click. And just like that, he was alone in the kitchen, the silence pressing down on him like a heavy weight. He stared at the empty table, the unfinished plates of food, and felt the hollowness in his chest deepen. Something was wrong. He didn't know what, but he could feel it in his bones. His family was slipping away from him, and he had no idea how to stop it. Jeffrey paced the hallway outside Layla's room, his mind filled with the day's frustrations. His conversation with Claudia at dinner had been another exercise in small talk, strained and empty. Layla had been absent again, claiming she had homework. After dinner, Claudia retreated to the bedroom with her phone, and Jeffrey had settled in front of the TV, but something gnawed at him. The distance, the coldness, it was suffocating. As he passed Layla's door, something stopped him in his tracks. Voices, soft, muffled, but distinct. It wasn't unusual for Layla to be on the phone, but this felt different. Jeffrey took a step closer, the sound of whispering clearer now. He couldn't hear the words, but there was an edge to the tone. Curiosity tugged at him, though a part of him felt he shouldn't be listening. But something about the way the voices sounded made him pause. He pressed his ear against the door, holding his breath. That's when he heard it. I want everyone to know that Uncle Dave is my real dad, not this loser. Jeffrey froze, his blood running cold. His mind tried to make sense of it. Uncle Dave. His brother Dave. Real dad. Inside the room, Layla's voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. I'm tired of pretending, Mom. I want him gone. Jeffrey's heart raced, thudding so hard in his chest it nearly drowned out the rest of the conversation. He felt dizzy, like the world had tilted under him. The words didn't make sense. His own daughter, his little girl, calling him a loser. Talking about Dave as a real father. Before he could even process the shock, another voice spoke, and it was like a punch to his gut. Claudia. I know, sweetheart, she said, her tone soothing, almost conspiratorial. But we need to wait. Once he gives me the house and the business, we'll be set. Then we can kick him out. It'll be just the three of us, and he can be someone else's problem. Jeffrey's breath caught in his throat. He gripped the doorframe for support, his knees feeling weak. The words hung in the air like a noose tightening around him. His wife, his partner of nearly 2 decades, was planning to betray him. And his daughter, the girl he'd raised, the one he thought was his flesh and blood, wasn't even his. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just an affair. This was a plot, a deliberate plan to destroy him, to take everything he'd worked for and leave him with nothing. His hands trembled as he stood there, his mind spinning. He wanted to burst through the door, confront them, scream, demand answers. But something stopped him. A cold, hard logic began to settle in his bones, overtaking the rage. They were planning something, and if he reacted now, they'd cover their tracks. They'd deny everything. He needed proof. He needed to know exactly what they were doing before he made his move. Inside the room, Layla's voice broke through his thoughts. But why wait? Why not just kick him out now? It's not like he's going to fight back. He's too weak. Claudia laughed softly, a sound that twisted Jeffrey's stomach. Because, honey, we need to be smart. We need to make sure everything is in our name first. Once the house and business are ours, he won't have anywhere to go. Trust me, it'll be worth the wait. Jeffrey backed away from the door, feeling like he might throw up. His pulse was pounding in his ears, and every fiber of his being wanted to charge in, demand an explanation. But he couldn't. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of knowing he'd heard. Not yet. His world was collapsing around him, but he needed to keep his head clear. He made his way down the hall as quietly as he could, the words replaying in his mind. Uncle Dave. His real dad. The three of them. Without him. Jeffrey reached the kitchen and leaned against the counter, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. His own brother had betrayed him. Dave, who had always been the golden boy, the charming one, was sleeping with his wife. And Layla, was she really his daughter? Had he been living a lie for all these years? He thought back to the signs he'd ignored. The late nights Claudia had spent running errands, the coldness in her touch, the way Layla had distanced herself from him over the past few months. He had brushed it off as teenage rebellion, normal marital drift. But now it was all so clear. They had been planning this for a long time, scheming behind his back, while he went about his life clueless. His hand clenched into a fist, knuckles white. He stared at the counter, trying to calm the storm brewing inside him. What was he supposed to do now? His family, the people he trusted most, were plotting to ruin him. He felt a surge of anger, a deep, burning rage that made his vision blur. But he knew he had to keep his cool. Jeffrey opened the fridge, more out of habit than hunger, and stared blankly at the shelves. His mind was already racing ahead, thinking about the next steps. He couldn't confront them. Not yet. Not until he had more information, more proof. He'd need a DNA test for Layla, something concrete. And he'd need to follow Claudia more closely, figure out how deep her betrayal went. He closed the fridge door and stood there for a moment, his hands gripping the counter. His body felt like it was made of lead, weighed down by the crushing reality of the situation. His marriage, his family, everything he had worked for, it was all built on lies. The house was quiet now. The voices in Layla's room had gone silent, and he could hear the faint creaking of the floorboards as Claudia moved around upstairs. She was probably getting ready for bed, oblivious to the fact that Jeffrey's entire world had just shattered. Taking a deep breath, Jeffrey moved toward the stairs. He had to act normal. He had to pretend he didn't know anything, at least for now. If Claudia suspected anything, she might change her plans, and he couldn't let that happen. Not when the stakes were this high. As he climbed the stairs, his mind kept returning to one thought, over and over. How long had this been going on? How long had he been the fool, believing in a family that didn't exist? When he reached the bedroom, Claudia was already in bed, her back turned to him. The soft glow of her phone lit up the dark room as she scrolled through it, completely unconcerned. She didn't look up when he entered, didn't even acknowledge him. Jeffrey sat on the edge of the bed, his back to her. His hands trembled slightly as he untied his shoes, the motions mechanical. His mind was still reeling, but he knew he had to keep his composure. He needed time to plan, to think. He wouldn't let them destroy him. Not without a fight. As he lay down beside her, the distance between them felt wider than ever. The bed was a chasm, And on the other side of it was a woman he no longer knew, a woman who had conspired to ruin his life. But he didn't say a word. Not yet. Claudia turned off her phone, set it on the nightstand, and curled up under the blankets without a word. Jeffrey stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. He had a plan to make, and when the time came, he would be ready. For the next week, Jeffrey moved with a precision that would have made anyone believe he was unaffected. His anger simmered beneath the surface, but he wore a mask of calm, going through the motions of daily life without giving any indication of the storm building inside him. Every morning, he left for work, kissed Claudia goodbye like usual, and pretended to be the same oblivious husband. But inside, every kiss, every glance felt like poison. He was counting down the days until his revenge. He knew confronting Claudia or Layla now would only give them a chance to wriggle out of it, to lie or twist the truth. No, he needed hard evidence, something irrefutable. So he contacted a private investigator, a man named Paul Reynolds. Paul was known for his discretion and his ability to dig up even the most hidden secrets. "Paul, I need to know if my wife is cheating on me," Jeffrey said when they first met in a small, nondescript cafe on the other side of town. "And with my brother, no less." Paul listened intently, his expression neutral but understanding. "You sure about this?" he asked. "Once you go down this path, there's no turning back." Jeffrey nodded, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I'm sure. I need to know the truth, and I need proof." Paul got to work immediately, trailing Claudia without her ever noticing. The first few days were quiet. She followed her usual routine of running errands, going to yoga, and visiting her mother. But on the fourth day, Paul sent Jeffrey the first damning piece of evidence, a photo of Claudia entering a hotel with Dave. The image was like a punch to the gut. Jeffrey stared at it on his phone, his hands trembling. There she was, walking into a hotel with his brother, like she had done it 100 times before. All the excuses, all the nights she had come home late, they had been lies. And Dave, his own brother, had betrayed him in the worst possible way. Jeffrey didn't react immediately. He couldn't afford to lose his cool. Instead, he forwarded the photo to his lawyer, already preparing for the next step in his plan. But he wasn't done yet. He needed more, something that would make sure Claudia and Dave couldn't talk their way out of this. The second piece of the puzzle was Layla. His heart ached at the thought of what he had overheard. His daughter, the girl he had raised for 16 years, wasn't his. But he needed confirmation. So without Claudia or Layla knowing, he swabbed a sample from Layla's toothbrush and sent it off for a DNA test. The results came back 3 days later. Jeffrey sat in his car when he opened the email, the sound of the city outside fading away as he read the words that confirmed his deepest fear. Layla was not his biological daughter. The report was cold, clinical. There was no match between him and the girl he had loved and raised. It was all a lie. For a moment, Jeffrey let himself feel the weight of it. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the realization that the family he had spent years building had been a farce. But he didn't let the grief consume him. Instead, he focused on the anger, the righteous fury that coursed through his veins. Claudia had lied to him for 16 years. She had let him believe Layla was his daughter while sneaking around with Dave. She had manipulated him, used him, and now she was planning to take everything from him. But Jeffrey wasn't going to let that happen. The plan started to form in his mind. Cold, calculated, and brutal. He would destroy them the way they had destroyed him. He wouldn't just expose their affair. He would ruin their lives. First, he reached out to his lawyer to begin drawing up the divorce papers. "I want everything airtight," he told her over the phone. "I want full control of the house and the business. Claudia can have nothing." The lawyer, a sharp woman named Janet, didn't ask questions. "I'll get started right away," she said. "But you'll need to play it cool until we have everything in place." "I can do that," Jeffrey replied. And he did. Every day, he woke up, smiled at Claudia, and played the part of the unsuspecting husband. He pretended not to notice when she spent more time on her phone, or when she went out for errands that always seemed to take longer than necessary. He acted like nothing was wrong while secretly laying the groundwork for his revenge. The private investigator continued his work, gathering more evidence. Jeffrey wanted an airtight case, photos, dates, even recordings if necessary. Paul delivered. Every time Claudia went to Dave's apartment, Paul was there, snapping pictures from a distance, tracking her movements. He even managed to record a conversation between the two of them one night as they left the building. Their voices were caught on tape as they laughed about their secret life behind Jeffrey's back. Jeffrey listened to the recording in his office late at night, his hands gripping the edge of his desk as Claudia's voice filled the room. "Once I have the house and the business, we'll be set," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "He's clueless. By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late." Dave chuckled, his voice low and smooth. "You always were the smart one, Claudia. I can't wait for it to be just the three of us." Jeffrey clenched his jaw so hard it hurt, but he didn't let himself react. Not yet. When he had all the evidence he needed, Jeffrey put the final piece of his plan into motion. He scheduled a family trip, something they hadn't done in years. He framed it as a birthday surprise for Layla, telling Claudia and Layla they were going on a special vacation. Just the three of them. They didn't suspect a thing. It was Layla's 16th birthday, and the house was buzzing with a strange tension. Claudia flitted around the kitchen, humming to herself as she set the table for a small family dinner. She was giddy, her excitement barely contained, and Jeffrey could see why. This was the year everything would fall into place for her, or so she thought. Layla, sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone, occasionally glanced up, smiling in anticipation of what her birthday would bring. Jeffrey sat at the kitchen table, watching them closely. Every movement, every smile, every casual interaction between Claudia and Layla felt like a dagger twisting in his gut. But outwardly, he wore the mask of a loving father and husband, carefully concealing the storm raging inside him. "Hey, birthday girl," Jeffrey said, standing up and moving toward Layla. His voice was warm, but it felt foreign to him. "How about we do something special this year? How about a surprise vacation? Just the three of us." Layla's eyes lit up, and she immediately looked at Claudia, excitement flickering between them. They had no idea what was coming. "Really, Dad? A vacation?" Layla asked, setting her phone down for the first time all afternoon. "Yeah," Jeffrey replied with a forced smile. "We'll head out tomorrow morning. Pack light. I've got everything else covered." Claudia walked over, wrapping her arms around him, and for the first time in weeks, she initiated physical contact. "That sounds amazing, babe. Just the three of us. Like old times," she said with a smile that made Jeffrey's skin crawl. It took everything in him not to recoil. She had no idea that her entire world was about to collapse. The next morning, Jeffrey woke early. He packed the car, smiling and laughing like everything was normal. Claudia seemed pleased, thinking that maybe she had him fooled completely. Layla, too, was excited, her usual teenage indifference replaced with rare enthusiasm. He packed the car with suitcases, carefully planning every detail. The bags looked like they were filled for a weekend getaway. But they were merely props. Claudia and Layla were still under the impression they were headed to their favorite beach house. Jeffrey, however, had a very different destination in mind. As he loaded the trunk, he took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was about to happen. By the time Claudia and Layla came down, the car was ready, and Jeffrey greeted them with the same fake smile he'd been practicing for weeks. They piled into the car, and as they drove off, the tension in the air was thick, though neither Claudia nor Layla seemed to notice. They were too busy chatting about what they might do on the vacation. "So, where exactly are we going?" Claudia asked, glancing over at him from the passenger seat. There was a spark of something in her eyes, anticipation, perhaps, or maybe greed. She thought she had won. She thought the pieces were finally falling into place. Jeffrey kept his eyes on the road, his voice calm. It's a surprise. Claudia smiled, turning back to look at Layla in the back seat. Can't wait to see what your dad's got planned, she said. Layla smiled but remained mostly silent, absorbed in her phone as usual. The drive was quiet after that, the hum of the car engine filling the silence. But as they turned off the main highway and took a detour onto a familiar road, Claudia's expression shifted. She recognized the route. They were headed toward Jeffrey's mother's house. A knot of confusion formed on her face. Wait, why are we going this way? Claudia asked, her smile faltering. This isn't the way to the beach. Jeffrey didn't answer immediately. He kept driving, the tension in the car growing with every mile. He could feel Claudia's unease rising as they approached the house. Finally, as they pulled up to the driveway of his mother's house, the house where his brother Dave also lived, Claudia's confusion turned to suspicion. She glanced at Jeffrey, her voice wavering. Jeffrey, what are we doing here? Layla looked up from her phone, sensing the change in atmosphere. Yeah, Dad, what's going on? I thought we were going on vacation. Jeffrey put the car in park, his heart pounding, though his exterior remained calm. He turned to face them, his eyes cold and calculating. We are, in a way. But first, there's something I need to show you. Without another word, Jeffrey got out of the car, opened the trunk, and pulled out a manila envelope along with a suitcase. Claudia and Layla exchanged nervous glances, neither of them moving to get out of the car. What's going on? Layla asked, her voice now laced with uncertainty. She had been excited about her birthday trip, but this was not what she had envisioned. Jeffrey walked back to their side of the car, the envelope in hand. He handed it to Claudia without a word. She stared at it, confused, before opening it and pulling out the contents. Her face went pale as she read. Inside were the DNA test results. Watching her face as she flipped through the documents, her hands trembling, Jeffrey felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Jeffrey, what is this? Her voice cracked, panic rising in her eyes. This, he said, his voice cold and steady, is everything you deserve. Before she could respond, he turned to Layla. His heart ached, but he kept his voice firm. It's a DNA test, Jeffrey said, his voice colder than ice. It confirms that Layla is not my daughter. Layla's eyes widened, her face draining of color. What? What do you mean, Dad? Jeffrey's gaze shifted to her, but there was no warmth left in his expression. Ask your gold digger mom and your real dad all your stupid questions. I'm out of this mess. Claudia's hands trembled as she flipped through the papers, her breath coming in short gasps. Jeffrey, this can't be right. I can explain. But Jeffrey cut her off, his voice low and controlled, masking the fury boiling beneath the surface. Save it, Claudia. I overheard everything. The night you and Layla talked about your plan to kick me out once I signed over the house and the business. Yeah, I heard it all. I've known about your affair for months. Tears welled up in Claudia's eyes, spilling down her cheeks as she tried to reach for him. Jeffrey, please. I'm sorry. We can fix this. We can. Fix it. Jeffrey laughed bitterly, shaking his head. There's nothing to fix, Claudia. You used me. You lied to me for 16 years. You've been scheming behind my back with my brother. And now, you want to take everything from me. Layla sat frozen in the back seat, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of her seat. Dad, I didn't know. I didn't know about any of this, she stammered, her voice breaking. Jeffrey glanced at her, his heart heavy but resolute. Maybe you didn't know the full extent, Layla, but you knew enough. You called me a loser. You wanted everyone to know Dave was your real dad. Well, now you get your wish. He stepped back, holding up another set of papers. And these, Claudia, are the divorce papers. I've already filed them. I'm done with both of you. No, Claudia cried, getting out of the car and stumbling toward him. She grabbed his arm, desperation in her eyes. Jeffrey, please. I made a mistake. I'll do anything. Just don't leave us. Don't leave me." Jeffrey yanked his arm free, his face hard as stone. "You made your choices, Claudia. Now you can live with them. Go ask Dave how he plans to support you because I'm done." He tossed the papers at their feet and walked toward his car, ignoring Claudia's sobs and Layla's stunned silence. As he drove away, leaving them standing in the driveway, he felt an odd sense of calm wash over him. The weight of their betrayal had lifted, and for the first time in months, Jeffrey felt free. They had schemed, plotted, and betrayed him. But in the end, he had taken everything from them, leaving them with nothing but their guilt and each other. The morning sun filtered through the blinds as Jeffrey sat at his desk, his mind racing as he reviewed the final steps of his plan. It had only been a few weeks since he had walked away from Claudia and Layla, leaving them standing in the driveway of his mother's house. But in that short span, everything had changed. Jeffrey had moved swiftly, making calls and setting things in motion that would ensure neither Claudia nor Dave would ever recover from the betrayal they had inflicted upon him. His first priority was securing control of his business. With the DNA results and the evidence of the affair, he contacted his lawyer and filed for full custody of the company. Claudia had no claim to it now, and Jeffrey made sure she never would. "Claudia thought she could take everything from me," Jeffrey muttered to himself as he signed off on the final legal documents. "She underestimated just how far I would go to protect what's mine." His lawyer had assured him that the DNA test was more than enough to ensure that Claudia would receive no alimony or child support. She had tried to manipulate the system, but the courts were on Jeffrey's side now. The judge had been disgusted by the betrayal, and it had been almost too easy for Jeffrey to make his case. But that wasn't enough for him. Jeffrey wanted more than just legal victories. He wanted to make sure that everyone in their lives knew the truth. He began by reaching out to their mutual friends, casually mentioning the affair between Claudia and Dave. Some were shocked, others sympathetic, but all were disgusted by what they learned. The rumors spread quickly, and soon Claudia and Dave's social circle had turned against them. Jeffrey didn't stop there. He forwarded the DNA test results to family members, co-workers, and even neighbors, ensuring that everyone who had ever respected or admired Claudia and Dave knew exactly what they had done. Within days, their reputations were in tatters. One afternoon, as Jeffrey sat in his living room sipping coffee, his phone buzzed with a message. He glanced at the screen, already knowing who it was. Claudia had been sending him texts nonstop for the past week. Long, tearful apologies, desperate pleas for forgiveness, promises to make things right. He opened the latest one, his expression unreadable as he read through her words. "Jeffrey, please. I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I love you, and I know I've made terrible mistakes. I'll do anything to fix this. Please don't leave us like this. You and I were happy once. We could be happy again. I know it. Just give me a chance to explain. Please don't throw our life away. For Layla's sake, if nothing else." Jeffrey stared at the message for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the screen. His heart was cold now. There was no room for forgiveness. He thought back to the night he overheard their conversation, the way they had plotted to take everything from him while treating him like a fool. Claudia's tearful messages meant nothing now. He deleted the text without replying. Later that night, there was a knock at his door. When Jeffrey opened it, he found Layla standing on the doorstep, her eyes red from crying. "Dad," she started, her voice trembling. "Please, can we talk? I didn't know. I didn't know everything, okay? Jeffrey cut her off before she could continue. "Layla, I'm done with this. With both of you, I raised you. I gave you everything I had. And this is how you repay me. Calling me a loser, wishing your uncle was your real dad." Layla's tears spilled over, but Jeffrey's face remained hard. She tried to speak, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. "I don't owe you anything," Jeffrey said firmly. "Not anymore." Without waiting for her response, he closed the door in her face, leaving her standing there, sobbing. It hurt, deep down, but Jeffrey knew this was the only way. He couldn't afford to let her back into his life. The betrayal had cut too deep. Meanwhile, Dave's life was unraveling just as quickly. Jeffrey had made sure to expose the affair to Dave's boss, a man with little tolerance for scandal, especially one involving family. Within days of the truth coming to light, Dave was fired. His reputation, carefully built over years, was shattered in an instant. He became a pariah, unable to find work, and soon his financial situation began to crumble. Claudia, too, was suffering. With no job, no alimony, and no support from Jeffrey, she struggled to make ends meet. The friends she once relied on had distanced themselves, and she found herself alone in a house that no longer felt like home. She had thought she could manipulate the situation, thought she could win, but now she realized just how thoroughly she had lost. And then came the final blow. Jeffrey, not content with merely exposing their affair, had decided to pursue criminal charges. He met with his lawyer and provided all the necessary evidence to bring a case of paternity fraud against both Claudia and Dave. The legal process was grueling, but Jeffrey was relentless. During the trial, Claudia and Dave sat in the courtroom, their faces pale as the evidence was presented. The DNA test was undeniable, and the affair had been well documented by the private investigator. The judge showed no mercy, condemning their actions as not only immoral but illegal. The court ruled in Jeffrey's favor, and both Claudia and Dave were sentenced to prison for fraud. As they were led away in handcuffs, Jeffrey watched from the back of the courtroom, his expression unreadable. There had been a time when he might have felt something: regret, sorrow, maybe even pity. But now, all he felt was satisfaction. They had betrayed him, used him, and thought they could get away with it. But Jeffrey had made sure that they paid for every lie, every secret, and every moment of deception. In the months that followed, Jeffrey found a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He threw himself into his work, expanding his business and focusing on his own well-being. He traveled, reconnected with old friends, and started to rebuild his life, this time on his own terms. As for Claudia and Dave, their lives were irreparably damaged. In prison, they had no one left to turn to, no friends, no family. Their betrayal had cost them everything. Layla, too, had distanced herself from both of them. She had tried to reach out to Jeffrey again, but after their last conversation, she realized he wasn't going to forgive her. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. Jeffrey, however, felt no guilt. He had done what he needed to do. He had protected himself, his business, and his future. And in the end, he had won. It had been 3 years since the day Jeffrey had walked away from Claudia and Layla. 3 years since he had left them standing in his mother's driveway with their lives in ruins. He had watched as their world crumbled under the weight of their own deceit. And now, the scars of betrayal were healing. Jeffrey had sold the house within 6 months of the divorce. Too many memories haunted its walls. The laughter that now felt false. The moments that had once been filled with love, but were tainted by lies. He had no intention of staying in a place that symbolized the life he had lost. Instead, he found a new home, smaller and simpler, in a quiet neighborhood where no one knew his story. It was the perfect clean slate. The first night in his new house, Jeffrey stood in the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring out the window at the unfamiliar streets. The silence around him was comforting, a stark contrast to the chaos that had once filled his life. No more whispered conspiracies behind his back. No more fake smiles from a wife who had long since stopped loving him. No more tension in every word exchanged with Layla. Just peace. A knock on the door startled him from his thoughts. Jeffrey wasn't expecting anyone. He placed the glass down and opened the door cautiously. Standing there was a woman he hadn't seen in years, Iva, an old friend from college. They had lost touch after graduation, but through a chance encounter at a business conference a few months ago, they had reconnected. Now, seeing her on his doorstep, Jeffrey smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. "I thought you might need some company for your first night in the new place," Eva said, holding up a bottle of wine. Jeffrey stepped aside and let her in. "I could use the company," he replied, closing the door behind her. They sat on the couch, sharing stories of the past, catching up on lost time. Eva had heard about his divorce, but never pressed him for details. She understood the weight of betrayal without needing the specifics. It was easy with her, no expectations, no pressure. Just two people enjoying each other's company. As the night wore on, Jeffrey felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. It wasn't the alcohol. It was the realization that his life was moving forward. Iva wasn't Claudia. She wasn't asking for anything from him other than his time. And for the first time, Jeffrey thought maybe, just maybe, he could let someone back in. Months turned into years, and Jeffrey's relationship with Iva blossomed into something he never thought he would find again. She was the opposite of Claudia in every way, honest, supportive, and genuinely kind. She never pushed him about his past, letting him open up at his own pace. Slowly, he found himself sharing more with her. The pain, the betrayal, the anger. And Eva listened, never judging, always patient. One evening after dinner, they sat together on the porch of their new home, watching the sunset. "Do you ever think about them?" Eva asked gently. She had never asked about Claudia or Layla before, sensing it was a wound that Jeffrey needed time to heal. Jeffrey took a deep breath, considering her question. "Not in the way I used to," he said after a moment. "There was a time when I couldn't think about anything else. The anger, the betrayal, it consumed me. But now they're just memories." Iva reached out and took his hand. "Do you ever regret it? The way things ended?" Jeffrey shook his head. "No, I did what I had to do. They made their choices, and I made mine. I don't regret it." Meanwhile, Claudia and Dave were living the consequences of their choices. After their release from prison, both had struggled to rebuild their lives. The affair, the paternity fraud, it had destroyed any semblance of a normal life for them. Dave had lost his job and reputation, and Claudia, once proud and manipulative, now lived in shame. They were still together, though their relationship was a shadow of what it once had been. There was no passion left between them, only guilt and the weight of their shared downfall. Claudia had tried to move on, but the guilt of what she had done to Jeffrey gnawed at her. Every day, she replayed the choices she had made, wondering how things had spiraled so far out of control. She missed the life she had with Jeffrey, the stability, the comfort, but it was gone, and she knew it was her fault. Layla, now an adult, had distanced herself from both her parents. She had tried to reach out to Jeffrey after the divorce, but his rejection had been final. She understood why. She had called him a loser, conspired with her mother to betray him, and treated him with contempt. The guilt of those words haunted her. Now living on her own, Layla struggled to find her way. Without her parents' support, she felt adrift, unsure of who she was or where she belonged. The weight of her actions followed her like a shadow, a constant reminder of the father she had lost and the love she had thrown away. One afternoon, Jeffrey received a letter in the mail. It was from Layla. He stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside was a simple note, written in shaky handwriting. "Dad, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. I was young and stupid, and I didn't realize what I had until it was gone. I hope you're happy. I just wanted to say that I love you, even if you never speak to me again. I'm sorry, Layla." Jeffrey read the note twice, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. For a moment, he considered reaching out to her, but then he folded the note and placed it in a drawer. He wasn't ready. Maybe someday he would be, but not yet. Jeffrey's life with Iva was peaceful. They traveled together, exploring places Jeffrey had always wanted to see but never had the chance. He had sold his business and now worked as a consultant, a job that allowed him the freedom to live life on his own terms. One evening, As they sat by the fire, Iva turned to him and smiled. "You look happy," she said. Jeffrey thought about it for a moment and realized she was right. For the first time in years, he truly was happy. The betrayal, the anger, the pain, they were behind him now. He had moved on, built a new life, and found someone who truly cared for him. "I am happy," Jeffrey said, squeezing Iva's hand. "For the first time in a long time, I really am." And with that, Jeffrey let the past go. The years of betrayal and revenge were behind him, and all that mattered now was the future, a future filled with love, trust, and peace.